Okay, thank you, Kay, and welcome back, everybody. So in this part of the webinar, I'm going to be shifting focus specifically to the people agenda, and I'm going to be talking about this in two parts. The first part is about getting people back to the workplace in the short term, and then I shall carry on to talk about the longer term implications and its impact on the future of work. So the first point to make is that it's actually going to be probably 10 times harder to get people back to work, if they are coming back, than sending them home in the first place. So why is that? Well, if you think about it, it was a pretty easy decision to start to send people home. It was in line with government policy and a very clear guidance from the government that people should be working from home wherever they could, obviously apart from essential workers. So that was all very straightforward in a way, although businesses had to adapt to flexible working very quickly. However, getting people back, a number of issues. The first one is that people are now used to working from home in many cases, and some may actually prefer it and be more productive. So, for example, they're not spending time commuting. So that's the first point. The second point is there's obviously still a big fear of infection, both in the workplace from co-workers, but also on public transport, which, despite all efforts, is still an area of high risk. Obviously, this week the transport in London is getting back to normal levels, for example, in terms of frequency. However, a lot of people are just not taking up the opportunity of returning to work for fear of infection. The third one is lack of childcare. Now, at the moment, most schools are not open. So those with childcare needs, in other words, school-age children, are not able to really bring themselves back into work for that reason. So that's another problem. And the fourth one is people themselves, your employees, may actually be vulnerable, may be sick, of course, or they could be shielding dependents who are vulnerable. So a lot of obstacles to be overcome. The next point is about flexible working. I think the evidence has shown that the adoption of flexible working has been a much faster rate than businesses thought was feasible. People have found that often it suits their lifestyle, saves commuting time, saves expense. And it's going to be cheaper for businesses both in the short and long term. There could also be a shift in employment contracts, whereas historically employees had to ask for flexible working as a request. It may well now be the default option and an expectation that that will be the normal way of working. Testing at work is problematic. At least there should be some form of risk assessments. Testing is not generally available, although the government is making noises about improving that. So it's hard to know if people are infected or not, if you're a risk to others, or even if you're immune and you've got antibodies. I know that some organisations are doing simple temperature checks as at least an indication of whether or not people may be infected, having a fever. Those large businesses with occupational health, company doctors, other forms of medical representation may find that there's an increased focus on those roles to assist in the process. And clearly things like PPE is still in short supply globally. And of course, cleaning needs to be much more thorough than previously as well. So a lot of practical things there. The next point is about travel to work. Now, this is particularly problematic. Where I live, obviously in central London, it's particularly bad, and trains and tubes will become potentially overcrowded. They already are at certain peak times. A big virus risk. Mixed messages about whether or not people have to wear face masks, advisory but not compulsory. And government messaging around walking and cycling may well be not pragmatic in many cases, particularly in London. Driving to work, again, I mean, the congestion charge has been reintroduced, parking restrictions being reintroduced. So that's going to be a major issue. And, you know, some firms may think about introducing things like minibuses and other forms of shared transportation, but again, this could be problematic. So a lot of things to think through in terms of travel to work. The next point is about staggered start times, and the various ways of organising this might be a one day on, one day off rota. It could be some more complicated rota, perhaps. I know the Adam Smith Institute is advocating a fortnightly rota of 4 days on and 10 days off. But whatever it takes, essentially, to reduce commuter pinch points. And the final point on this slide is social distancing is here to stay. So keeping 2 meters apart in the workplace, with implications for desking, how space is utilised, maybe only one person in the lift at a time, communal areas such as restaurants, shared facilities like loos, even use of vending machines, limiting meeting room sizes, number of people in meetings, even visitors and delivery policies all need to be revisited. So if we can move on to the next slide, please.